Debbie, thanks so much for making time in your incredibly busy schedule to talk to me today.
No, thank you for having me. It's an honour to be able to do this podcast with you. So thank you for inviting me.
I really appreciate it. Look, Debbie, you've had quite an extraordinary journey and level of achievement. You've gone from being incarcerated yourself to now being one of Australia's leading advocates for women and children through decarceration. You've studied extensively, including social work, Gestalt, the law, graduate diploma in forensic mental health, and you're one of Queensland's leading criminal solicitors running your own law firm. You established Sisters Inside and have been a staunch advocate, as well as having been recognised for that leadership and advocacy through numerous awards, including the Australian Medal and Australian Human Rights Medal. What I'm really curious about is, through all of your experiences and all of that advocacy, what have you learnt about your own leadership, and specifically how feminism has informed or shaped that leadership?
Sure. So before I start the conversation, I want to acknowledge the unceded land that I reside on here in Meanjin, but more so Nullumpool is where I actually live, which goes down to Minjurrabah. So basically that's south of Brisbane down to Stradbroke Island, otherwise in whitefellas terms. And I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present. I think for me, just to even think about leadership and talk about leadership, it's about knowing our history in this country, and how this country was invaded, land was stolen, and it's been an ongoing project, if you like, of government, of genocide and continuing threat and theft of land. We have native title, but that's not land rights, and we still cannot reconcile our white selves with our violent past that we have come to reside on First Nations land. And so as a leader, it's really important to know that, I believe, for myself. So knowing that allows me then to come from that position to be able to support those young women around me, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, to walk with them in the steps that they want to go forward in relation to the area that I'm most interested in, have been most affected in my life, and that's through criminalisation and imprisonment. When you're criminalised and imprisoned, it's very damaging and traumatic, and usually before that happens, you've gone through a number of traumas, whether it's sexual assault, physical assault, family violence, domestic violence, homelessness, poverty. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's intergenerational trauma from the invasion of the country. So we have layers of that trauma that we actually got to work through. And so as a woman, I believe that I've got to understand who I am, absolutely. And new things happen for me every day and new learnings happen for every day. But I've actually done a lot of work about my own process to actually reconcile and be comfortable under my own skin. And as a woman, I feel pretty comfortable under my own skin. When I'm not, I can actually feel it. So I know I got to do a bit more work. I can bracket it and move over there, because, you know, what we get in life is what we need in life, I believe. And so the triggers that happen, you know, when you've done the work, like signposts to say, I need to go and address that and reconcile that and work through that grief or that trauma or whatever it is that's being triggered. And so I support other young women and women, those that are around me, you know, to do the same and to walk in those footsteps, if you like, from a position of power with, not power over. So, you know, and I stand on the shoulders of some amazing, strong women that have come before me and continue to do so, walk alongside some very powerful women in the world who are prison abolitionists like myself. And so we have a network that we support each other and can challenge each other, you know, if we're saying things or doing things that aren't in line with what we're actually, you know, supposed to be progressing. And that's moving towards the end of the abolition, the end of the prison industrial complex. So decarceration is the journey, abolition is the destiny. And so I may not see that destiny in my life, but I feel it's my responsibility to give the skills and the tools that I have, you know, in a bag of tricks that I hold, if you like, and give it to the young women who now I support that are coming up and being very strong activists and voices around the abolition of the prison industrial complex. So feminism informs me, and I'm an abolition feminist. I'm not a carceral feminist. There's a clear difference in that, and many feminists are carceral feminists, which, you know, there's a growing number of us now around the world that actually say we can no longer be carceral feminists, we must be abolition feminists, because carceral feminism gets us the same, what has always got us as women who've been pipelined into the prison system or been criminalised, is the ongoing trauma. And feminism for me is to end trauma and end violence. And we've got to think of other ways to keep ourselves safe, keep our families safe, for community to be safe, and other ways around security, that we're not relying on carceral mechanisms like police, surveillance, punishment models and prisons. We've got to start thinking outside the bars and how we do that very different. And that's very much an abolitionist feminist.
So I'm going to ask you a different question to get out of my hands, because I'm really curious about what you're talking about.
Because you're right, that's a long journey. And you've talked about the impact of generational trauma. Given the situation we're in at the moment, pandemic impact, you know, economically, health on the most vulnerable, what do you think the most important things to keep in mind and next steps in that journey are, Debbie?
Well, we have a situation in this country around COVID-19, and it's like the state has locked down the prisons to say that no one's allowed in. So like family members or professionals were allowed back in now, the last couple of weeks you have. But in the last 4 months, so from March till just recently, everybody's been locked out of the prison system, except for those employed by corrective services. So prison staff or program staff. And we know that a few of those people have come into the prison with COVID. However, the prison system is saying that there's no COVID in the prison. But we actually don't know if that's true or not, because not everybody's been tested. We do know now, as of just the weekend past, that COVID is now in Victorian prisons. So in an adult system and a children's youth prison, which is really frightening. Frightening for those people that are in prison, frightening for the children who are in the youth prison, and frightening for the staff. That's why we have called on continually for the last 4 months to free everybody from prison. Now, when we say that, it's about we need people to be freed so that they actually don't die because of this pandemic. Because we know that now that COVID's in the prison, that it will spread quite quickly, and that people will die at a greater rate than they die out here in the free world. And that's been clearly shown in prisons in other countries around the world. Prisons where they have tested absolutely everybody, 80% have tested positive to COVID. And they are dying, black and brown people are dying at a higher percentage than white people. This is a pandemic, this is about racial capitalism, and once again, the attack on here, First Nations people and black and brown people. We know that people in prison, their health is worse than anybody out in the free world. We know that when they're released, they will be released to homelessness, and the list goes on of ongoing trauma. There's nothing that happens in a prison that actually so-called rehabilitates you, which everyone is told to believe, to come out of prison and get on with life. It's actually a dumping ground. It's a default response, if you like, for states, for governments, for poverty, homelessness, mental illness, drug and alcohol addictions, for First Nations people, because of the racism, the structure of the racist organisation. So we'll actually see people die once it spreads. And I believe, as someone who's had COVID and have the ongoing health struggles, if I was in prison with this, and I know what prison's like, I would be quite unwell, maybe even to the point where I may be on a ventilator, even right now, if I was in prison right now because of my chest. That's if the prison got me to a hospital. And the thing is, prisons actually don't want people in prison released from prison to go to hospitals. And we've seen that happen in other countries. We saw that in Melbourne when the state locked down the 9 towers of people who lived in 9 towers, and they built makeshift hospitals with tents. And they've done that in other prisons around the world. And we will see the same. They were doing that in New South Wales, getting ready a couple of months ago, pitching tents and making them as makeshift hospitals. We are all human beings, and we are so much more than the worst thing we've ever done in our lives. That doesn't mean even if you're being criminalized in prison, that's anybody, that's you or I. We are so much more. And we're not allowed as prisoners, when we're in prison, to transform who we are. We are actually always seen by the state and people outside as that offender, that criminal, you know, that behavior, that whatever we did, that's what we're remembered for. And we're never allowed to transform, where we actually are transforming all the time when we're in prison, as well as out here in the free world. Transformation is real. And those of us that have been in prison, are in prison, must be allowed to transform too. Because I did this back then doesn't mean I'm going to continue to do that. And we've got to stop looking in this so-called crystal ball that is a myth about who's going to do what in the future, because we actually don't know. We do know one thing, though. I do know one thing. If I treat people badly, with disrespect and no dignity, and brutalize them in a prison system, they're going to react in a very negative, similar way. If I treat someone in prison with respect and dignity and care, I know that I will get that in return. As someone that's been in prison and going in, you know, I first went into a prison when I was 13, so that's 23, 33, 40, 50, 46 years ago, all right? Like, I'm nearly 60, so I'm just trying to work out the maths. You know, as someone who's been going in the prison as a professional, as a CEO of Sisters Inside for 25 years, I have never been abused. I have never been assaulted, you know, and we hear stories all the time coming out of the prison, how staff are assaulted. That's an indication of how people are being treated inside. It's not an indication of who people are inside, because I know if the prison officers bring someone to me who's been locked in solitary confinement and they bring them shackled, body belted and shackled, I will say, take those shackles off her now. And they're like, she's dangerous. Take them off. She's not dangerous. And so usually the person in charge says, take them off. It's just Kilroy. She'll be fine. Why is it that it's just Kilroy and she's fine? It's because the way that I actually respect another human being, whether they've got mental health problems or not, it's about talking to someone else calmly, respectfully, with dignity, how I'd like to be respected. And we can work in that. Yes, women will be upset. Yes, they're angry. Yes, they're traumatized. But that doesn't mean it's an attack on me. It's about understanding what's happened to them as individuals and a group. And it's about not setting up those women, those people inside, to believe, because they're so hyper responsible, to believe that when they get out, that they are the dictators of their own destruction or failure. The prison will give you 10 phone numbers, for example, to find a home to stay in, some accommodation, when we know there is no accommodation out here in the free world. So women are set up. They go, oh, great, I can find accommodation, I can do this. They actually can't do any of that. They're set up to fail. And this is what's the problem with the prison industrial complex and with racial capitalism. It's because of the individualization. And what COVID has done, I believe, around the world has hit corporations, has hit racial capitalism straight between the eyes for all of us to see that that's not how we want to live, really. We actually don't want to get rid of the people that we are relying on now to keep us alive, the delivery drivers, the postal workers, the nurses, people who work in the shop up the road, you know, all those people that corporations have been trying to get rid of, you know, to put in electronic means. And these are the people who are saving our lives right now. So, you know, when I say free them all, they need to be freed. Now, people say to me, what about violent people? Now, if someone is going to harm someone else, of course, I don't want them out harming someone else. None of us do as abolitionists. We take violence very, very seriously. And as women who've been victims of horrific violence, we don't want male violence. We don't want men running around abusing and perpetrating violence, physical violence, sexual violence, anywhere. but it's about how we think outside the bars and put them in a place that's safe, that's actually not mirroring their violent behaviour with another violent system. It's about removing them from the community in another place that's not a prison because it's actually violent. So it's about thinking of other ways of safety. But I mean, we're talking about very few people in prison that would be so, you know. So I know that we could release every woman in every prison in every jurisdiction in this country, and if the money followed them to establish them into their own accommodation, their homes, contact with their children, have food, you know, have resources, which include financial resources. That's why I believe we need a guaranteed minimum income for everybody. You know, that life will go on. We will not see crime spike. And we know that crime's going down and not going up, even though our prison rates are like increasing drastically right now. So it's thinking the world would be different. Yeah. But it's how we start dismantling the world now. And I think we've been doing that in different ways. For example, allowing people to work at home, you know, that the government has shown their hand, both state and federal, that they do have money when it's actually required to keep people alive, to keep people safe. Now, I know that's because they don't want the white middle upper class and middle class contracting the virus, but it's about actually giving them funds to be able to stay in homes, get in homes, feed themselves, and get on with life. And the government has been able to prop that up. And even with unemployment, people who work in those lower level jobs, you know, that they have been able to continue to give them money, government money, to keep them afloat. And we need to demand, you know, like free childcare. I can't believe that we let free childcare go without even a bump in the road. Like, what happened to feminism there? Where were we? Women who have children now, babies, deserve free childcare. The government has proven that they can do that, but we let that go. We just, I don't know what happened. It just, I kept talking about it, but just slid off the radar like, oh, we go back to normal, like we're good little robots, good little sheep, and do what the government wants. We have to go to the street and start a revolution like it is in the US. People on the street demanding, we as all women, you know, I said to the young women around me who had babies in childcare, let's take the babies, the little toddlers, to the local federal member's office and drop them off there, that they can look after the children so you can keep going to work. But I mean, what happened? And what happened is because NGOs have become so complicit in this racial capitalist framework and carceral mechanisms that we just accept what that status quo was, where we know there can be a new one that has been created for a short period of time, but push it out. So that's the ongoing future for us all.
Debbie, I think what you're talking about in terms of transformation, both personal and of our systems, and what we've seen in terms of what's possible, I think all of us are seeing things happen that everyone's been saying is impossible for a long time. So there's real windows of hope in that. And what you've talked about, both the personal and the political and systems transformation that's required, but also the way you've talked about your role in that and being a mentor and a supporter and the bringing, you know, supporting the women around you and those that you can is very inspiring. So thank you very much for talking to me and sharing those thoughts today.
All right, thank you.